Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining me today. So sitting behind me here is a 2015 Chevy Silverado 5.3 liter V8 under the hood with about 170,000 miles on it. It's got a really odd, strange, probably my first time hearing this specific complaint. Spoiler alert, the vehicle's getting a high pressure fuel pump. But what if I told you it's getting a high pressure fuel pump and it's not actually related to the pressure from the high pressure fuel pump through the fuel injector type of thing? What if it's actually not related to that? The high pressure fuel pump is creating the right amount of pressure that this truck needs. But the complaint today is the customer says that if he fills this thing up with fuel from anywhere, any gas station besides a BP gas station, the check engine light comes on, and this thing actually continues to run after it's been shut off. It essentially diesels after the engine or the ignition switch has been turned off. Now he says when he fills up with BP fuel, the check engine light goes off and it no longer diesels after the key's been shut off. So kind of weird. That's the first time that I've ever heard one particular specific brand of fuel, no matter if it's filled up at a BP in town here by me or by where this guy lives, BP fuel shuts the light off, and any other fuel anywhere else sets the light on. So, well, I can tell you guys through the diagnosis so far, it's not running right on BP fuel either. I don't know if there's some sort of different additive in that fuel or what it is. I don't know why. It's still running poorly, but maybe it's running ever so slightly better that this truck doesn't set the check engine light with it on. I don't know. Maybe his driving habits are different when he fills up with BP fuel compared to anywhere else. I don't know. It doesn't really matter on the type of fuel being used here. The problem is present with BP fuel in here as well. So I got the truck warmed up, started in my diagnosis, decided I want to bring you guys along for the fun. I did record all my data ahead of time because this truck is loud. It's got aftermarket exhaust on it. It's hard to talk over it with the microphone. So let's take a look at my first glimpse of data here. So you can see down in the bottom left corner, we're looking at about a 15-minute recording, and I captured long-term and short-term fuel trims. I grabbed the O2 sensors, and I grabbed engine speed and coolant temperature. So you can see at the beginning of this recording at 0 seconds, we're already warmed up. I started this recording after a test drive. Fuel trims looked beautiful on the test drive. I saw no issues whatsoever, and I thought, great. No problem found. This guy just drove 2 hours to my house, and I'm not going to be able to, figure out what the heck is wrong with his truck because right now, no rich condition, and it's got BP fuel in it, so I'm going to have to run that out of the tank and put some other fuel in it. Well, just hold on here because the problem is here, I promise. So we're already warmed up, 192 degrees. We're sitting at an idle 554 RPM, and let's just start scrubbing through our time lapse here. And we are now, let's just skip ahead. We'll go to the 5-minute mark. So at 5 minutes in, again, we started this recording with the engine warm. The engine is just sitting here idling. It's getting hot, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. 5 minutes in, we're in -14, -7 on our long-term fuel trim. Continuing on, let's just jump ahead to the 10-minute mark. So we're at 210 degrees. So the cooling fans are working, right? They must have kicked in, reduced this thing by almost 2 degrees. But look at our long-term fuel trims, -22 and -18. Again, BP fuel in the tank. This thing is running rich right now. The computer is subtracting fuel away from this engine. And let's just scrub to the end of the recording. 15 minutes and 19 seconds. And we're sitting at 212 degrees. And look at our long-term fuel trims. They're pegged pretty much to the maximum rich condition here, -26, -25 on our bank 1 and bank 2. We're running rich on both banks, pretty much equal. So it's something that's probably affecting the entire engine. Now this is, like I said, high pressure fuel pump is the concern here. And through some research, these things are common for the high pressure fuel pump failing. And it's not in a pressure related fuel delivery type of way. It's actually in a, well, this pump was redesigned for a reason. It's something faulty with the first pump that was in this engine leaking fuel into the crankcase. Okay, so essentially into our oil pan, into our engine, we're bleeding fuel into the engine. What that does, overfills our engine, so we actually end up with oil or oil and fuel mixture on our dipstick that's higher than it should be, which causes the crankcase breather system, the PCV system, to actually bring those fuel and oil vapors and fumes into the air snorkel, into the intake manifold to be burned. So now we're mixing up our fuel and our air and our crankcase fumes, but now those crankcase fumes are not only oil, they're actually some fuel vapor in there as well, and it's over full, so maybe we're actually bringing some particles in there as well. That's why when this thing gets hot, everything in an engine expands, the oil expands, right? Gets nice and hot, causes us to run rich. We're essentially siphoning fuel and oil mixture into the intake manifold, and we're supplementing this engine with fuel at this point. Now, this is a bad thing. We don't want this to happen for a long time because we're thinning out our oil. We're reducing its lubrication properties. It's not doing what it should be for an engine. Well, all engines today, oil is hypercritical. This one's no different. So we don't want this to happen for a long time. So if you're running into a rich condition on a Silverado, not even just a Silverado, but really any direct injected vehicle, check the oil and make sure it's not over full. If it is, you might be dealing with an issue of a leak between the high pressure fuel pump and the crankcase, because again, this is a mechanically driven fuel pump. So it has to connect somehow to the crankcase because it's got to be mechanically driven by the crankshaft or the camshaft, whichever direction or whichever manner this one is driven by, or any high pressure fuel pump is driven by. So how do we know at this point it's the high pressure fuel pump and not maybe a leaking fuel injector or something like that? Because if a fuel injector leaks and it gets past the rings, it could bleed that fuel down in the crankcase as well, right? Well, there's a kind of a cool test that we can do when working with the fuel system, and it's really kind of fun to play with on direct injected vehicles. So let's go ahead, jump out of this data. We'll grab some different data that I had found. Oh, by the way, who's dealt with issues with the algorithm that's calculating ethanol content on these trucks, or any GM vehicle for that matter? This one's reading 10%. It's spot on. And more than likely, if we were reading E85 or 85%, our rich condition would be all the time. And the reason why that is E85 fuel takes more volume, more fuel to create the same amount of energy than that 87 octane regular unleaded does. So if the algorithm, for whatever reason, we're miscalculating and saying this truck was being fed E85, but it was being fed regular fuel, regular gas, then it would actually be increasing essentially the injector pulse width, giving us more fuel into the cylinder if it were reading E85 and it was actually, in fact, regular gas, which would cause a rich condition all the time. Not the case here, but I did check just to make sure. So grabbing fuel pressure, which is low pressure, and then grabbing both of our high pressure rail sensors, and we'll grab engine speed as well. We'll take this back to the beginning of the graph here. You can see here we are at idle. I didn't grab temperature on this one, I'm sorry, but the engine is warmed up. This is a hot engine. We're reading 580 and 551 for our high pressure and 58 on our low pressure. So I'm going to just skip ahead here a little bit, and you're going to watch engine speed drop to 0. There we go. So we're 11 seconds in to our recording here. Engine speed dropped to 0. And like with any fuel system, we should maintain fuel pressure in the low side and the high side. Low side will typically bleed off a little bit of pressure. That check valve isn't going to hold it all. But what's really cool about direct injected systems is we have fuel trapped between the fuel injector and the high pressure fuel pump. Okay? What happens to fuel when it changes temperature? For those of you who've been watching our videos for a while, we covered this in detail in the evap class. If fuel cools, it condenses. If it heats up or changes and warms up, it expands, okay? We have fuel that came out of our gas tank at the back of the truck, traveled through the lines, and is now sitting within a aluminum, most likely aluminum, fuel rail on a big old V8 under the hood at 200 plus degrees of coolant temperature that under hood temp is hot, okay, that fuel is going to expand. And that's exactly what happens here as we scrub through this. Here you can see we'll go 3 minutes in. 3 minutes in, we went from around 500 to 600 PSI. We're up to 900 PSI sitting in the fuel rail. And again, the engine is not running. The mechanically driven high pressure fuel pump has not done anything whatsoever. All we've done is naturally created pressure inside of the fuel rail through this system, okay? Through the GDI system, through temperature change of our fuel. And if we continue to scrub ahead here, at some point here, I started the engine up. We'll get to right before that. Okay, right before I fired up the engine, right there, 1,247 PSI and 1,203 PSI sitting on our rail sensors, okay? We can't generate 1,200 PSI if we have a leaking injector. Besides, is it likely that one leaking injector would cause both banks to run rich? Probably not, okay? Probably not the case. But this is always a cool test to make sure that we're not leaking fuel past an injector. I don't know why it doesn't leak fuel out of the high pressure fuel pump like this. It shouldn't build pressure if this high pressure pump is leaking. Maybe this high pressure fuel pump only leaks at really high pressure. I don't know. I haven't pulled this one out yet, but I don't know. There's something going on here with that high pressure fuel pump. So let's check the oil on here. Make sure that, let's see if it's over full. And there you can see we're definitely over full. The customer tells me that every time the oil is changed on here, it's given the proper amount of oil. It's never over full on the stick. So we've definitely gained some fuel within that system. So we'll have to change the oil on here and replace the high pressure fuel pump. If you're looking for one more test to really confirm that we're dealing with the PCV system siphoning fuel and oil vapor or even particles into the intake manifold, go ahead and disconnect both breather hoses off of the crankcase, okay? So off of each valve cover runs a breather hose to the air box. This one happens to have an aftermarket air filter on it, but disconnect those two. Make sure you plug up the ports on the air box so that we're not bringing in any random mysterious air that's not being read by the mass airflow sensor that could cause a lean condition. So let's plug up those ports and see what the fuel trims look like. If your fuel trims get better, you definitely have a problem with overfull crankcase, overfull oil, fuel in the oil, high pressure fuel pump leaking. Okay? Makes sense? Kind of makes sense how I got to that point. So if you guys enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure to click on that little bell icon so you get a notification when our next video comes out, which will actually be the replacement of this high pressure fuel pump. So if you're wondering how to do it, make sure you get notified when we release that video by clicking that little bell icon. So I really appreciate you guys watching. I hope you picked something up from this video today. So as always, everyone, thank you for watching and happy wrenching. Thank you.